Hey friends, welcome back to my kitchen. If you're new here, hi, my name is Jen. I do cooking, canning, and food preservation videos every Tuesday, and I do vlogs on Friday. If that's the sort of content you're into, I really hope you'll consider subscribing and sticking around. On this day, it was really hot outside, and I had an abundance of cucumbers and tomatoes from my garden, so I decided to do something fresh for dinner. A nice light garden supper. I'm making cucumber and tomato bruschetta. It's so easy. So I started by chopping up about 3 cloves of garlic. I did end up doing 2 more because those cloves were pretty small. So in a small pan, I'm going to add enough olive oil to coat the bottom, maybe like a fourth or a half an inch of oil. It's not very much. I'd say maybe a fourth of a cup. And to that, I'm going to add all of my garlic that I chopped. And I'm going to keep this on kind of a low heat. You want this to simmer but not burn. And I'm only going to let this garlic go long enough till I can smell it. When it becomes fragrant, I'm going to turn the heat off. And then I'm going to remove my pan from this burner and just let it cool while I'm getting everything else ready. You don't want to add hot oil to your vegetables. And the time it took me to get everything cut up, that oil did cool down to room temperature. So I'm going to start with, I have several small cucumbers. But if you're using like English cucumbers, you'll need like 2 medium to large sized cucumbers. And because these are not like a slicer variety of cucumber, I am going to end up pulling the seeds out of these. The seeds weren't really huge, but there were a lot of them. These cucumbers that I grew, this variety, is actually meant for pickling. So I'm just going to take, a small spoon and run it down the centers of these cucumbers and get most of those seeds out of the middle before I go ahead and chop them up. It's just a textural thing. You don't want to, when you take a bite of this bruschetta, you don't want to bite into a bunch of seeds. So if you're using, pickling style cucumbers, just take the extra few seconds to scrape the seeds out into a bowl. And once I've done that, I'm just going to dice my cucumbers into about 1/4 inch cubes. You want these to be pretty small, and you're going to want to when you cut your tomatoes, you're going to want them to be about the same size as the cucumbers. Now you can do these cucumbers smaller if you like. It's personal preference, but I thought, like 1/4 inch cubes was pretty perfect for this. And you'll notice that I peeled my cucumbers. You don't have to do that. Again, it's personal preference. Because these were a pickling variety, the outside of the skins weren't exactly the most attractive, and the skins were kind of thick on them. So I went ahead and just peeled them, but English cucumbers have a nice thin skin on them, so you really don't have to peel them if you don't want to. So once I get them all diced up, I'm just going to add them to a large bowl. And then I'm going to move right along to these beautiful tomatoes. I grew these tomatoes. This is the first year that I have successfully grown tomatoes, and this variety was called Ruby Monster, and they are beautiful. Absolutely stunning. So all I'm going to do here is just remove the tops of these, and because of this particular variety tomato doesn't have a really big core in it, um, depending on, if you grew your tomatoes, you bought them at a grocery store, when you cut the top off, check. And if you see a big hard core in the center of it, you might want to go ahead and cut that out. Again, it's a texture thing. But these were nice, super ripe, so they were very juicy and very sweet, and I didn't have to remove any of the cores on them. So all I'm going to do is get these diced up about the same size as my cucumbers. And it was at this point I actually realized that these tomatoes are so ripe, I had to sharpen my knife so that I could get through them because they were very soft. Use a sharp knife. It definitely helps when cutting super ripe tomatoes. That way you don't just smash them all into pieces. And once I get these chopped and I start adding them to the bowl, I use my bench scraper, and as I pick up the tomatoes, I kind of let the excess juice run off of them. You can see all of that tomato juice on that board, and I didn't necessarily want all of that in the bottom of my bowl, so I just kind of let the pieces of tomato hang out on the bench scraper with it tilted at an angle so that the excess juice could drip off. You'll see here in just a second. I mean, these were amazing tomatoes. I'm so very proud of myself. If you are a gardener and you have a success, celebrate your small successes. Every little bit counts. So I went ahead and cleaned up my cutting board, and all I'm going to do at this point is just give this a really good mix. I want to make sure that, the tomatoes and the cucumbers are evenly spread throughout the bowl. We're going to mix this several times while we make it, but this helps just distribute the juices. This recipe does call for fresh basil. I have two varieties of basil growing in my garden, and both are doing really well, but one is doing much better than the other. So I went ahead and I picked the mammoth basil or large leaf basil. You're going to want about a cup of this once it's chopped. So I'm going to roll this up nice and tight after I've washed them, and I'm going to cut super thin little strips. You be very careful, watch your fingers, but I'm going to cut all the way down to the end where the stems are, and I'm going to toss the stems. I don't want the texture of the stems in the dish. They're perfectly edible, but I just didn't want the little pieces in there. And once I get this all cut into ribbons, I'm going to split it in half. If you're using smaller basil leaves, you won't have to do this part. Just cut them into ribbons. And I'm going to take about a pinch of this and set it to the side for garnish later. And then all of the rest of this, about a cup's worth, I'm going to put in with my tomatoes and cucumbers. And then I'm going to add some salt. Be liberal with the salt. Tomatoes need salt. When you put salt on a tomato, it changes the flavor completely. So, don't be afraid to add salt to your food. Again, I'm going to give this a really good mix just to make sure that the basil is distributed around the tomatoes and the cucumbers. Make sure that the salt gets mixed in really well. And then I'm going to go ahead and add some balsamic vinegar. I probably used about 2 teaspoons, just a glug around the bowl. If you don't like balsamic, you don't have to add it. It's optional. Also, at this point, if you had some Parmesan cheese, if you wanted to add that in here, it would also be really good. And then I'm going to take my cooled oil with the garlic and add that right on top. Make sure I don't miss anything in this pan. This is also homegrown garlic, so we do not waste it. Give it a good scrape and then mix it in. Now, after you get it all mixed up, you're going to want to make sure to taste it. You're going to taste it for salt levels because at this point, that's a lot of vegetables. You may need to add more salt. Clearly, I needed to add more salt. And I also decided I was going to add just a little bit of black pepper because I do enjoy black pepper on my tomatoes. It's a nice flavor. But if you don't like pepper, don't add it. Stir it up again, and then that's it. I'm just going to cover this with some plastic wrap and put it in the fridge until I am done toasting the bread. This is some bread that I made the night before. I can leave a little card here in the corner if you're interested in this bread recipe. It is a no-knead bread recipe. But if you do not bake your own bread, just go get a baguette or some French bread from the grocery store. It's super flexible, just whatever you happen to like. Something that you can toast up nicely. Now, I wouldn't use white bread, but a nice crusty bread that you can toast with butter. I'm going to cut this in about 1 inch, ½ inch to 1 inch slices. Some folks in my house like their bread thicker, and some folks like it thinner. So I'm just doing like a variety of sizes of slices. And then I've got my cast iron skillet over here heating up, and all I'm going to do is just put a thin coating of butter on each side of this bread, and we're going to toast it in a cast iron skillet and let it get nice and charred. Now, I imagine if you just wanted to toast this in the toaster, you totally could. I think that you could toast this in the oven. Just stick it on the oven rack and let it get nice and crusty. I think traditionally they actually toast this on the grill, like grill grates. But I like using my cast iron because it puts a really nice char on the edges of the bread, and that adds a lot of flavor. Now, I am not saying to burn the heck out of this bread, but a little bit of char around the edges is nice. It complements the vegetables really well. So just toast this up to your level of preference, and then you're almost done. I mean, it's a quick and easy dinner. And while I was waiting for my bread to finish toasting, I decided to get out my big ½ gallon jar of giardiniera that I fermented a while back. I actually did a video on this, so I'll try to remember to leave a link to the video in the description box below. But I thought these fermented pickles would add a nice kick to this really mild and fresh dinner. And the only thing left to do when your toast is done is just to plate it up. Now I am using a slotted spoon so that the toasted bread doesn't get soggy. I don't want all of that excess liquid down at the bottom of the bowl. I just want, the marinated vegetables. And you can put as little or as much of that on your toast as you want. I really piled it up. My family likes everything a little bit excessive. So once you get it all plated up, I just gave it a little sprinkling of salt on the top. Not much at all, just a little to garnish it. And then I used the rest of that basil that I cut up to garnish the tops of these as well. This would also be a nice time to add some Parmesan cheese, again, if that's your thing, if you like Parmesan. This was a really nice fresh dinner. Everybody in my house really enjoyed it, even the folks that don't really care for tomatoes. So I hope that you give this a try. Maybe this is a good way for you to use up some of the abundance from your garden. And until next time, friends, happy cooking.